All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Happy to see so many familiar faces. I know quite a few of you have been joining us regularly for these. My name is Ruben Mercado. For those of you I haven't had the chance to connect with, I'm part of the team over here for the SHIP National Office, facilitating career and leadership and networking programs of all sorts, including these ones. So for those of you who might be joining for the first time or maybe aren't familiar, we have these calls once a month that are primarily designed for anyone who maybe is not specifically connected with a chapter, but wants the opportunity to take part in professional development and things like these. So we're happy to do these. We've had them going for a couple months and happy to see some momentum going and some regular attendees. But today we have a follow-up on our last session. So we're fortunate to be joined by Gabriel Najera, who is the founder and president of Najera Consulting Group, which is a strategic planning and organizational effectiveness consulting firm that he founded in 1999. Gabriel earned a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering from Michigan State University and an MBA from the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. And throughout his consulting career, has helped nonprofit organizations, foundations, and educational institutions develop strategies that create meaningful and measurable social impact. He is also a SHIP lifetime member and recipient of the Jaime Oaxaca Award, where he helped organize and establish the SHIP Chicago professional chapter, serving as the first president. So during SHIP's early years, the Chicago chapter was among the society's first professional chapters and helped expand SHIP's reach beyond its original Southern California roots. So drawing on lessons from his upbringing in a Michigan farm worker family, his engineering background, and more than 5 decades of leadership and professional experience, Gabriel is the author of Harvesting Wisdom, an upcoming book exploring how life experiences shape leadership, contribution, and our ability to see the connections that influence our lives and work. So thank you once again for taking the time out of your schedule to be with us. We're looking forward to another great presentation from you. And I will go ahead and turn it over. And yeah, as mentioned, I'll also be monitoring the chat. So any questions, comments, I'll be keeping an eye on those. So
Oh, well, great.
thanks so much for being here.
Oh, man, great, Ruben. Well, thank you for that introduction. Man, when you said 5 decades, man, all of a sudden I felt kind of old. But but in any event, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be back with you. And before we begin today's conversation, I like to spend just a moment reconnecting to where we left off in session one. So for those of you who were with us, and for those of you who weren't, last time we explored the ideas that many of the capabilities we rely on every day were developed long before we entered the workplace. And that's basically what my book, Harvesting Wisdom, is all about. So this series of presentations that I'm conducting last time, this one is the second one, and I believe we have another one coming up next month, are all related to the Harvesting Wisdom book that I will soon be available. Uh, Hopefully, I didn't really fully understand the book publishing process. So they tell me that it should be published either early autumn or sometime in the winter time. So last time we reflected on how life has an extraordinary way of teaching us lessons before we even recognize their significance. And looking back on my own life, I realized that the potato fields that I talked about last time, where I worked as a young boy, uh, wasn't just teaching me the value of hard work. They were teaching me about contribution. The conversations under the shade tree that I talked about were simply family conversations. They were teaching me how to listen, how to ask thoughtful questions, how to understand another person's perspective. Even the kindergarten teacher who introduced me as a future engineer to the PTA meeting, before I could possibly imagine such a future, was helping me recognize a capability that had not yet fully, emerged and that I didn't even recognize. Now, the common thread running through those stories was simple. Life was teaching me long before I realized I was learning. So today's lesson is going to build upon that same idea, but instead of looking inward, I like us to look outward. I like us to explore something that every one of us experiences throughout our careers, yet few of us are ever formally taught to understand. And I like to talk today about organizations. Now, I'm assuming all of us here are engineers. And as engineers, we're trained to understand how things work. We study mathematics, physics, chemistry, mechanics, right? We learn to analyze data, troubleshoot problems, develop solutions. We've become very good at understanding technical systems. Yet, you know, most of us receive very little preparation understanding the organizations in which we'll spend, the majority of our professional lives working in. Some of us are going to spend 30, 40 years working in organizations. Now, me, like many young engineers, I entered the workforce believing something that seemed perfectly logical to me, and I think will seem logical to you, that if I worked hard, produced quality work, accepted responsibility, and treated people well, everything else would naturally take care of itself, right? So for the most part, that approach, served me well throughout school and during the early years of my engineering career. Then something happened that changed the questions I began asking myself. You see, early in my career at Amoco, and I started my professional career in the 1970s, so that dates me a while. So at Amoco, I received my first professional performance evaluation. So overall, it was a pretty positive review, but one project received a much lower evaluation than I expected. The project had been delayed that I was working on became delayed because approvals outside my control had taken much longer than anticipated. And then once those approvals finally came through, I had very little time remaining to complete the project successfully. And I remember sitting with my manager discussing the evaluation. His explanation on why he gave me a very, very low rating made perfect sense. He said the company has procedures, and those procedures, needed to be followed. And from the organization's perspective, everything was working exactly as it had been designed to work. Okay. So I understood his explanation, but as I walked back to my office, I couldn't help shake the feeling that something just didn't make sense. Now, it wasn't frustration, it wasn't disappointment, it was curiosity. You see, for the first time in my professional life, I found myself asking a question that would quietly shape the rest of my career. And that question was, what am I not seeing? Okay, what am I not seeing? So looking back now, I realize that wasn't actually the first time I had noticed organizations behaving differently than I had expected. Years earlier, while I was still in college, I had worked as an engineering intern at General Motors. And even then, I noticed, some projects that seemed to move more slowly than they should, departments that didn't always communicate effectively, decisions that appeared disconnected from the work itself. But man, I was an intern, okay? Not just an intern, but, I was an intern. There was really no consequences for me. I noticed those things, thought they were interesting, and I moved on. But, once I became a practicing engineer, and at that time I had a growing family, I had a mortgage, However, those same situations suddenly mattered more than when I was an intern, right? They affected my project, my performance, and my ability to contribute. But, instead of becoming cynical, I became fascinated, okay? I wanted to understand why organizations filled with intelligent, hardworking people sometimes produce results that didn't seem to make, sense. And as my career progressed, I had the privilege of working in manufacturing, in international business, consulting, higher education, nonprofit organizations, and professional organizations like SHIP. On the surface, these organizations couldn't have been more different. They served different customers, pursued different missions. They were led by different kinds of people. Yet, despite all of those differences, I kept encountering, similar challenges. Communication problems surfaced in one organization after another. Trust, became an issue in organizations that had entirely different cultures. Decision making, slowed down. I saw departments unintentionally working against each one another. Good people became frustrated trying to accomplish meaningful work. Eventually, I caught myself thinking something that at first sounded almost too simple, funny at the time. I said to myself, I've heard this song before. Not the same lyrics, not the same performers, not even the same audience, but somehow the melody sounded familiar. Now, some of you may know or may not that before becoming an engineer, I spent 10 years performing as a Tejano musician all over the United States, 4 nights a week for 10 years. And one of the things musicians learn quickly is that you don't have to hear an entire song to recognize it. Sometimes the opening few notes are all it takes. And, long before the lyrics begin, you as a musician know what's coming because you've heard the pattern before. And I would imagine many of us have experienced something similar watching a movie. Show of hands, how many have seen the movie Jaws? Okay, I see a couple of hands. Okay, if you've seen the movie Jaws, you probably remember there's a theme, dun 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 dun, and you probably remember that theme, and all of a sudden, when you hear that, a shark jumps out, right? Right? So, you probably remember the music long before you remember the shark. Those first few notes weren't the problem themselves. They were simply a signal that something was happening beneath the surface. The music wasn't the shark. It was telling you the shark was coming. Does that make sense? So over time, I realized organizations have their own music. Sometimes the melody sounds like repeated conversations about communications. Sometimes the music sounds like concerns about morale or frustration with decision making. Sometimes it's the melody, it's about another committee being formed to solve a problem that's already been discussed 3 different times. Okay. The organizations are different, the people are different. Yet somehow the melody keeps repeating itself and it sounds very familiar. So, what I learned to do, I stopped reacting to the visible events and began listening to the melody underneath these events. Okay. Now, that simple change changed everything for me. Okay. Instead of immediately asking, how do we solve this problem? Okay, remember an event, communication problems coming up. I began asking a different question. I began asking myself, what is producing this result? What is producing this result? Not how do I solve this problem? Now, that question quietly changed the direction of my career. It influenced the way I approach leadership, consulting, strategic planning, and eventually the way I began thinking about organizations themselves. And over the years, I became increasingly curious about why organizations behave the way they did. I found myself reading, studying, and exploring, uh, the field of systems thinking because it gave me a deeper understanding of the patterns I had already been observing throughout my career. It didn't replace what I had been experiencing or what experience had taught me. It simply gave me a language for it. So, looking back, I realized that my career wasn't shaped by finding better answers. It was shaped by asking better questions. And one of those questions would lead to one of the most, at that time, most important leadership lessons of my career. I served as a business unit manager for Amoco. I have to say that after I got that low evaluation, luckily I survived that and kept getting better at my job and learning how to maneuver within corporate America. So after getting my MBA from the University of Chicago, I got promoted, from engineering. I went into the business side of the business. So while serving as a business unit manager for Amoco, I encountered a business challenge that completely changed the way I understood organizations. At the time, I believed I was managing several independent business problems, but I would eventually discover that I was actually looking at a single system. And understanding that difference changed the way I looked at organizations ever since. And I like to share one of those stories with you because it became an important leadership lesson of my career. And rather than simply telling you what happened, I'd like to invite you to become part of the management team, my management team for the next few minutes. Would you like to do that? Okay, show of hands. I can't. Okay, we're putting the shad. Yeah, I'm in. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be showing you a few slides from an actual business case my leadership team and I worked through. And as you look through the first slide, imagine that you're sitting around the conference table with me, and you're one of the managers responsible for the business performance of the business. So, Ruben, I'm going to share my screen. Do you have me? That I could share a screen?
Yeah, it
Yep,
should be your co-host, and I have yeah, there it is. It's
there it
come up.
is. Okay, let me make sure I'm over here. Okay, so as you look for this at this first slide, imagine you're sitting around the conference table with me. You're one of the managers responsible for the performance of the business. And together, we're trying to understand why our results are beginning to deteriorate. And before we discuss solutions, just want you to look at and study the trend lines for a moment. As you study the graphs, what do you notice? What concerns you? More importantly, what story do you think these trend lines are beginning to tell? And don't worry about finding the right answers. Simply observe what you see. Okay? So I'm going to pause a moment, take a look at the slide, and then you could put your responses in the chat, or we could open it up and get your comments. Okay? So look at the trend lines. What are they telling you? What is the story here? Any reaction? Anyone care to share?
We have Bartholomew in the chat put profitability is looking questionable already.
Yeah, I'd add
Profitability?
to that where it looks like there's a large level of effort to get new business,
Yeah.
which might be causing errors and like omissions and delivery issues, which is affecting the net questionable.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. Anyone else? Well, let me move on. So,
The
when I
Margaret also put sales increases and delivery issues in the chat.
got it. Okay. So if I may, let me move on. When I facilitate strategic planning sessions today, I often encourage, leadership teams to resist the temptation to jump immediately to solutions. Okay. Before solving a problem, we first need to understand the story the data is trying to tell us. That's exactly what we were attempting to do during this meeting. And this is an actual true case. Okay, this actually happened to me. Okay. So as our discussion unfolded, we noticed many of the same things that you probably noticed. Okay. Sales had begun to decline, even though we knew that market conditions, within our sector remained very favorable. Customer billing errors were increasing, as was pointed out. Delivery problems were becoming more frequent. Our sales force was spending more and more time pursuing new accounts, while profitability continued to fall. Now, none of these trends were encouraging, and naturally, we wanted to take action. So we did what most management teams do. We identified every visible problem. And as you could see here, the problems we identified, as some of you noticed, there were billing errors, late deliveries, excessive sales, uh, you know, time on accounts, on new accounts, the systems poorly used. Okay. Then we began brainstorming solutions. Okay. So what do you think those solutions were? Just think about them for right now. So if there were billing errors, what do you think a solution would be? If there were late deliveries, what would a solution be? If there was excessive sales time accounts on new accounts? Hmm. Well, let me show you the solutions that my team came up with. Okay. So, we began brainstorming solutions. If billing errors were increasing, hey, let's rewrite the procedures and retrain the employees. If deliveries were late, let's improve our routing systems. If salespeople were spending too much time pursuing new accounts, let's establish new account policies. Every visible problem received its own logical solution. Now, looking back, I could honestly say that every solution that my management team proposed seemed reasonable. And if I had asked you to vote at that moment, I suspect that most of us would have agreed that those were exactly the right actions to take. Okay. Now, let me ask you another question. As you look at this slide, would you have done anything differently? Anyone? And this is the interactive part of the session. Yeah. Would you have done anything different?
See, I will raise my hand here, but
Yeah,
I
Paula.
don't. Well, the thing is, I don't understand how this is all set up, so I wouldn't know what other solutions would come about this. Because
Mm-hmm.
or else I would have been like, let's pause and like stop doing or trying to put out new business out there or new accounts and just work on what we have right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
but again, I don't know about
Well,
setups.
we're at that time, when I was with Amoco, this business unit that I was responsible was a close to $1 billion business unit. Okay. So pausing and thinking, wasn't on the bingo card, if you will. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're
I
asking right now, if you saw those problems, okay, billing errors, is that a logical solution? Rewrite billing manuals and retrain the employees. That's all I'm asking right now. I'm asking, do those seem like logical solutions to you? They may
Yes.
not be the right solution, but are they logical?
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
know if rewriting a manual would be good. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
retraining, but not rewriting something.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe just reiterating what was already there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Okay.
Nicole also put in the chat maybe adjust staffing in the billing and new accounts departments, or adding staff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. All right. Again, no right or wrong here. Okay. And our team didn't think we were making a mistake when we did this. We believed that we had identified problems and developed thoughtful solutions. So we implemented them with confidence, expecting the business to improve. Okay. except something really unexpected happened. The problems didn't improve. Here's what happened. What happened? Did they get better or did they become worse?
Worse.
Worse, yeah. Okay. Yeah, sales continued to decline, service quality deteriorated further, profitability continued to fall. Despite our best efforts, despite talented people working hard, and despite implementing one reasonable solution after another, the organization continued producing the very results we were trying to eliminate. Okay. Now, I remember sitting in my office looking at these reports and asking myself the same question that had surfaced earlier after my performance evaluation. You remember? I talked about that. What am I not seeing? Okay. And that question unexpectedly brought back a childhood memory. And that childhood memory was, I remember my grandfather installing, now I'm going to date myself here, installing a sheet of linoleum flooring. Now, these were big white sheets of linoleum. You put, glue on the floor, then you put the linoleum and you roll it with a roller. And after carefully laying into place on the floor, a large air bubble appeared beneath the surface. Now, as a little boy, I assumed that my grandfather would simply, press harder on the bubble until the bubble disappeared. Instead, he studied it for a while. He rolled the roller across the bubble and watched it disappear, then watched it reappear somewhere else on the floor. He repeated this several times before reaching into his pocket, pulling out a small pin and making the tiniest hole in the linoleum where the bubble was and allowing the trapped air to escape. Instantly, the bubble disappeared, leaving the floor perfectly smooth. Now, as a child, I thought my grandfather had fixed the bubble. Years later, I realized something more important. He hadn't fixed the bubble, he understood what was creating the bubble. Right? So, standing in that conference room at Amoco, I suddenly realized our management team had been doing exactly, what I expected my grandfather to do. We were pushing harder on the bubble. Mhm. Every solution we proposed addressed something we could see. None of our solutions addressed what was producing what we were seeing. We had become so focused on the visible problems that we never stopped to ask whether those problems were connected. We assumed we were managing several independent issues, when in reality, we were looking at different expressions of the same underlying system. Now, that realization completely changed the conversation. Instead of asking which problem we should solve first, we began asking a much more powerful question. What if these aren't separate problems at all? What if they're all being produced by the same underlying system? Okay. That question led us to the next slide, which I call looking beneath the surface. And what made this diagram valuable wasn't that it gave us a magic solution. It gave us a different way of seeing. Instead of looking at isolated problems, we began looking at the relationships between them instead of treating departments as independent parts of the business. So yeah, this is what's typically called a systems thinking loop. And basically, systems thinking loop, you have what's called a reinforcing loop. I won't go into too deep on the mechanics of this, but just to show you how the problems we were facing were all interconnected. Okay, so we have sales targets. Okay, we're the lubricants business unit. We're international. We have international business. Our sales force has a sales target to meet. As those sales targets, went up, efforts on new accounts went up. If efforts on new accounts went up, pledges and promises went up, which caused burden on service to go up, which then caused the quality of our service to go down. As the quality of our service went down, the number of customers, went down. So the efforts on new accounts went up. So this was a cycle, that was happening. Poor quality service causes customer turnover. Salesforce compensates by seeking new customers. Their methods of attracting new customers aggregate services further. So we discovered that our salespeople weren't creating the problem. Customer service wasn't creating the problem. Operations wasn't creating the problem. Each group was responding rationally to the pressures it was experiencing, but together, those perfectly reasonable responses were producing the results that none of us want. That day, I learned something that has stayed with me throughout the rest of my career. Organizations are perfectly designed to produce the results that they are currently getting. Okay. So when I first heard that idea, it was unsettling because it forced me to look beyond individual performance and individual departments. It challenged me to look at the organization as a whole. If the results we were getting were being produced by the system itself, then solving one problem at a time would never be enough. We had to understand how the parts of the organization were interacting with one another before we could hope to change the result. And that realization, team, changed the way I led that business. It changed the approach, the way I approach consulting, and it changed the way I looked at organizations ever since. And furthermore, going a little bit deeper, I delved into why that system was operating the way it was, and it all had to do with the mental models we had about our role and our departments. Okay, so when I asked, hey, sales guys, why are you going after new customers? Well, it's easier to get new customers than to retrieve old ones. When we messed up with the billing errors with the old customer, we found it, less challenging to go after new customers that didn't know our past history, right? When I asked about, okay, why are you guys making these special promises and all that? Well, that's aggressive selling, okay? We feel that, that's what we're supposed to do. When I talk to the customer service people, okay, why are you accepting these, special pricing and promising non-stock products outside of our area? They say, well, we're team players. We want to be part of the team. We felt that we couldn't push back. So you see, all these mental models were at play here. And once we addressed it, fortunately, and fortunately for me in my career, we were able to turn this around. So I'm going to stop sharing this for right now. Any observations or questions on that you have? Any feedback or questions? Did that make sense? And again, I just touched upon this very briefly. Anything in the chat, Ruben? Or we could open up
Not
to
quite,
questions.
not quite yet.
Okay. Well, let
We've
me move on. So, what I want to point out that realization of the mental models and the system, has influenced every strategic planning engagement I've led over the past decades, 3 decades. Whenever I began working with a leadership team, one of the first questions I ask is not what is your biggest problem. Instead, I ask, what results are you currently producing, and what might be your organization what might your organization be doing, perhaps unintentionally, to produce the results that you're getting? Now, at first, that question, usually catches people by surprise because, like most of us, we become accustomed to thinking about isolated problems rather than interconnected relationships. Yet, once they begin looking beneath the surface, the mental models at play something remarkable happens. Conversations become less defensive. People stop blaming one another. Curiosity begins replacing judgment, and that's often the moment real learning begins. So I like to pause here for just a moment and invite you to think about your organization. Think about a challenge that seems to surface repeatedly. It might involve communication. It might involve decision making. It might involve collaboration between departments. And it might be something you've personally experienced, something else that you've experienced personally over the past several months. Okay. Now ask yourself a different question. Rather than asking who is causing this, what if you ask what might be producing this? What what relationships are influencing the outcome? What assumptions are people making? In other words, their mental models. And what incentives, pressures, or structures might be encouraging perfectly reasonable people to behave in ways that collectively produce results that no one actually wants. So I want you to take just a moment and think about that. And if you'd like, if you could share, what you come up with in the chat or, open up the mic, I'd like to hear about that. Okay. What problems are you experiencing? Okay? What tune, what melody are you hearing? You over and over again. Anyone?
I mean, I know for myself here, like collaboration and communication is something that I get frustrated on when I guess it's like certain projects, sometimes people tend to forget, if someone has any experience on it to kind of help them lead on and then I don't know if some people just maybe have a fear of thinking that if they're asking too many questions that means, that they won't be able to work on those kind of projects.
I got
So
you.
that's one thing that frustrates me. I was like, don't be afraid to ask questions because I feel like rather clarify sooner rather than later.
Got you. Have you experienced that in other organizations that you've been associated with?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Cindy put something in the chat on not enough training was a common saying at their old company.
Okay. Okay.
I
Well, let
know
me.
for I know for me, well, not me necessarily, not like in this role, but some like from talking to colleagues across like other companies, sometimes a need to, I guess, like appease like external stakeholders and like people and the people at the company maybe not having a full scale of like everything that's being asked, everything that's like needed. So sometimes, which I guess goes into like a lack of communication
Mhm.
too, like a
Yeah,
lack of communication on
yeah,
what the common goal everyone's working towards is.
got it. Okay. Well, let me move on. Thank you very much for sharing, and I think we'll have time later on for Q&A, and we could revisit this too. So thank you very much for sharing, and one of the reasons I've always enjoyed working with engineers, not only because I am one, and I like working with my fellow engineers, is that we as engineers are naturally curious. Okay, we like understanding how things work. If a machine stops functioning properly, we don't usually blame the machine. Okay, we begin diagnosing, it. We gather information. We look for patterns. We test assumptions. We understand that what appears to be the problem is often only a symptom of something happening somewhere else in the system. Okay. We kind of sense that. So my encouragement to you is to bring that same mindset into the organizations where you'll spend, most of your careers in. Okay. Diagnose before you prescribe, seek to understand before seeking to solve, and become curious before becoming frustrated. Okay. Those three habits have served me well, not only as an engineer, but as a manager, consultant, facilitator, and dare I say, family member. Okay. Now, in closing, I like to bring this conversation a little closer to home by talking briefly about the organization we all love, SHIP. When Ruben, Susan, and I first discussed, this presentation series, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that they brought to my attention that many SHIP members aren't connected to a local professional chapter. Some live in communities where there isn't a chapter nearby. Others are in career transition or circumstances that make it difficult to participate in formal leadership roles. And it's easy to conclude that if you're not serving on a committee or holding a official position, your influence in SHIP is somehow limited. I don't believe that's true. In fact, I think it's another example on how we sometimes focus only on the visible part of the system. Now, think about the engineer who spends 30 minutes encouraging a college student who's beginning to doubt whether they belong in engineering at all. Think about the SHIP member who introduces two professional members together, who eventually become, mentors, collaborators, or lifelong friends. Think about the experienced engineer who quietly shares advice over a cup of coffee with someone just beginning their career. Now, none of those moments appear on an organizational chart. They aren't reflected in a committee structure or annual reports, yet together they strengthen SHIP. They build trust, they expand relationships, they create opportunities that otherwise might never exist. And those contributions to us may seem small when viewed individually, but team collectively, they change the system. And that's one of the reasons I continue to believe so strongly in SHIP. SHIP's greatest impact isn't created only through formal programs or official leadership positions. It's created through thousands of conversations, relationships, acts of encouragement, mentoring moments, introductions, and opportunities that quietly compound over time. Most of those contributions are invisible while they're happening. Their significance, often becomes only visible when we step back and take a look at the larger picture. And, that thought brings us full circle to where we began this series. In the first session that I conducted last month, I reflected on the wisdom we've been gathering throughout our lives, often without recognizing it. Today, we explored the idea that organizations are constantly teaching us as well, if we're willing to slow down, become curious, and look beneath the surface. In both cases, the lesson is similar. Some of the most important forces shaping our lives aren't immediately visible. They're quietly working beneath the surface, waiting for us to notice the patterns that they create. So, as I conclude today, I'd like to leave you with one final challenge. Tomorrow morning, when you walk into work, become an observer before you become a problem solver. Okay? Listen carefully to the questions people are asking. Notice the conversations that keep repeating themselves over and over and over again. Pay attention to the issues that seem to appear, over and over again, as I mentioned. And before asking, how do we solve this? Pause long enough to ask a different question. What am I not seeing? Okay? That simple question has guided me for most of my professional life. It has made me a better engineer, a better manager, better consultant, facilitator, and dare I say, better, husband and father and family member. Okay. And I believe it could make each of us a better leader. So, in closing, the next session, which will be our final session together, I'm going to take one more step on this journey. We've explored how life shapes us. We've explored how organization shapes us. Next time, we'll explore how understanding both gives us the opportunity to intentionally shape the future, not only for ourselves, for our organizations, and for the people who will one day follow in our footsteps. So thank you very much. Ruben, if the audience has any questions, I'm here to answer and any questions that may come up or explain some of the concepts that I presented. But thank you very much for allowing me to present to you guys. I appreciate it very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Seeing a lot of claps and a lot of positive reactions in the
No,
chat so far. While we're waiting for any potential questions to come up, I did put in the chat the registration for the next session, which is going to be August 19th. So same time and on a Wednesday as well. So we
okay.
would love for everyone
The,
to
the
come.
the only thing the only issue I had with the schedule for today's session, man, it was scheduled during the same time as the World Cup.
I know.
All right, so
I did see that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So no one scored yet. It's at the half and no one has scored yet.
all
Just
right, well,
an
good,
update
man.
for
I'll go.
everyone.
I'll go.
So,
I'll go
any
listen in.
questions? Any questions, comments from our participants, from attendees today? Got a little bit of time left. If anybody wants to share something, maybe a
Yeah,
takeaway or any questions that they have.
did it make sense to you, or is there anything I could further explain or elaborate on? One of the books that you see behind me is called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. This book right here, I have it there because it was, I think, published in the 1990s. Although it may be dated, a lot of the concepts and principles are, how should I say, they stand the test of time. Huh? So if you like to delve deeper into some of the concepts that I talked about, system thinking, mental models, that's a book to get. No questions? Quiet crowd.
Yeah, Cindy said very insightful talk. Bala said it's like taking a step back, breathe, and trying to frustrate yourself with the situation. Just trying to understand is difficult.
Mhm. And as I mentioned in the last session, Ruben, you have my contact information. Feel free to share it with the members, and I'm open to reach out to me. One of the things that I encourage anyone to do, I even do it myself, man. I'm not afraid of asking for help. I'm not afraid of asking someone, to help me with a situation, with a problem. Yeah. And sometimes people say, well, I have over 54 years of experience, team. Okay, so I'm dating myself, and you might be asking, well, how old is this guy? Well, I'm up there in age. I'm what's considered a senior citizen. However, I still find myself reaching out, to others. You know, standing.
You never stop learning. You
You
never
never
stop.
stop learning. Never stop learning. No.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind because there is, especially as you advance in your career, I think there's an increasing like need to feel like you have all the answers and stuff. But no, I don't think anybody ever reaches that point.
Now.
At least not like good leaders. Like good leaders know where there's gaps and where they can fill in other people. So it's
Yep.
important
Yep.
kind of keep building that network and those connections in that
Yeah.
way.
And one of the beauties of an organization like SHIP, you have individuals like myself and others who have the experience that, well, one of the reasons that we formed the organization is to be able to help one another, support one another. Uh, I mentioned when I first started engineering college, there were less than 600 Now keep this number in mind. 600 minority engineering students enrolled in engineering throughout the United States. 600.
Wow.
That included Black, that included Latinos, okay? That included other minority groups. Yeah. So, we were desperate in getting with people that understood our situation. Okay, so just think about it. Okay, back in the 60s and 70s when I was starting, there was, even though we have social issue challenges today, back then they were even worse. Okay, if I were to go and ask, my manager or someone for, help, right away it says, I knew it. This affirmative action stuff is not working. These guys aren't equipped or capable or ready to join the engineering workforce. Okay. But within SHIP, we have a non-threatening environment where we could go and ask. Rod Garcia, when I first joined the organization, had much more experience than me in civil engineering. Hey, Rod, when you had this issue, how did you handle it? Right?
Mhm.
So I encourage you all, don't be shy. Go out and ask. So with that, Ruben, if no one else has any questions, we could go back to watching or at least I'll go and watch the World Cup.
All right. Well, if anybody thinks of anything else, like mentioned, feel free to reach out, pass along anyone's contact information, and we'll see you at the next one. We have August 19th in the books. Registration's in the chat here. Hope to see everyone there. I put my LinkedIn in the chat as well, so feel free to connect with me if you have questions or ideas for any future events like these. And everyone enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you soon. Stay safe out there, and good to see everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, I'll hang on, Ruben, for a little quick debrief and for the next session, okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.